Everybody, it's Spencer. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about our new title sponsor before we get into this episode. Do you have old bikes clogging up your garage, your basement, wherever you keep them? Do you need to free up cash so you can buy that new bike you've been looking at? You got to get that gravel bike with the deep dish zip wheels. You know you need it. Well, we're sponsored by Bicycle, which is the world's largest global marketplace for pre-owned bikes. That's BUYCYCLE.com. With over 20,000 pre-owned road, gravel, and mountain and triathlon bikes on the platform, Bicycle connects buyers and sellers on a global scale, making the process of buying and selling bikes safe and convenient for riders. They pride themselves on easy shipping, fast and safe payments, top-rated customer service, and a huge selection of great brands at great prices. And you're probably asking, okay, I want to sell a bike. I want to get out of my garage. I want some cash, but that's got to be a pain, right? Like, well, how am I going to ship that? Well, when you sell your bike on Bicycle, they ship a bike box directly to you, and then someone comes and picks it up, and they coordinate a time that's convenient for your schedule. So it couldn't be easier. So if this all sounds interesting, well, for a limited time only, use code BTPListen to unlock 30% off your seller protection when you sell your bike on the platform. That is BTPListen for 30% off seller protection when you sell your bike on the Bicycle platform. Again, that is BUYCYCLE.com. Check it out today. All right, let's get into the episode. Everybody, welcome back to the Beyond the Peloton podcast. I'm Spencer Martin, author of the Beyond the Peloton newsletter. I'm here, as always, with Andrew Vontz from the Choose the Hard Way podcast, thebetterlab.io. We are going to touch on a few topics of the week, as well as Andrew's new favorite sport, speed skating, long distance speed skating. But first, Andrew, do you want to plug anything before we get going?
Well, the bad news is you need ice if you want to speed skate. It's been 50 degrees here all week in Hope, Maine. It is late November. Tell you what, I'll take it. I actually got out a buff, which I never really understood the purpose of, and rode yesterday. It was 40 degrees. It turns out keeping your neck warm makes it possible to ride. And the Better Lab is going to help you build science-backed practices to sleep better that last over time, which is what it actually takes to get great sleep. I hope you all saw the piece in Bello this week by Jim Cotton about the Better Lab. And what he said is, I'm going to quote him here, if the bad sleep data that's spewing out of your smartwatch or HRV tracker is giving you nightmares, there might be a better way to optimize your Z's. The Better Lab, a new platform from former Strava execs Andrew Vontz and David Lorsch, proactively teaches the healthy practices that unlock the power of sleep. I know if you're listening to this, you're somebody who likes to feel good when you work out or race, and getting great sleep is the ultimate amplifier of health, wellness, and performance. So please go download the Better Lab now in the Apple App Store for free. I have heard from a lot of Beyond the Peloton listeners who are using the Better Lab and loving it. Would love to hear from more of you. So you can DM me at HardwayPod, and thanks for checking it out. And if you haven't, please do so. And Spencer, you know, I know that we've been talking a little bit about hematocrit recently, and Mr. 60% himself, Bjarne Riis. We, of course, have a Beyond the Peloton Summit coming up in Tucson in late January. Anyone listening who's in the area, as well as Keegan and Sophia, who we're hoping will pull up for a live pod, let us know if you're going to be down in Tucson. I will be getting shot out of the shootout because, as Spencer knows, I've been focusing on bulking up. I think I took down like half a quart of ice cream last night, so I'm going to be going right off the back of that ride. But I am excited, and I am thinking a bit about how to naturally enhance my hematocrit in advance of that event as we go up into the thin air there at Mount Lemmon.
Yeah, no, I just tested. I'm at 44, so I've got a little bit of wiggle room before I hit the 50 threshold. I was telling you this yesterday. I didn't even know this was possible. I was talking to two friends recently. Both of them naturally 60% hematocrits. Like, I didn't even know that was possible. So maybe Bjarne Riis.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that is possible. Did these guys, were they traveling with centrifuges? I mean, were they getting up in the middle of the night and spinning some blood, man?
What's funny is one of them, very good runner, like full, like D1 full scholarship, which is almost impossible to do. But as he's aged, it's like really affected him. He didn't know that he had really high hematocrit naturally, and it's made him lethargic, and he has to go in and get blood drained like every few weeks. They like drain it, like let it go into a bucket.
Can I grab a bag from this guy?
I know, that's what I was thinking. Like,
come on,
throw a couple bags over here. And then another one was telling me he's from the west of Ireland. He said it's called the West of Ireland disease because apparently of inbreeding, which causes naturally high hematocrits. Richard Pluga is on a plane, on a Ryanair flight now, going there to figure out what genome is causing the 60% hematocrit. He's going to figure it out. It's funny you mentioned Reese. We should address the elephant in the room, my lava lamp, the lava lamp that I'm looking at. I did this podcast from London last week. I'm now in another city, an undisclosed city on another continent, in a replica of the hotel room. It's crazy. It's making me feel like I'm losing my mind. Did you watch the show, The Rehearsal, on HBO?
Sure.
Unbelievable show with Nathan Fielder, perhaps. Maybe that's a baseball player, but he like builds sets of people's houses or big points in their lives, and then how they're that was one of the craziest shows I've ever seen. But I feel like I'm living
right.
Just a plug for The Rehearsal. Go watch this podcast. Go watch The Rehearsal. I feel like I'm living in an episode of that. But I was watching the Jan Ullrich documentary. I flew to Germany to download the Jan Ullrich documentary so I could get around the Amazon's incredible VPN detection.
Yeah,
and it's I thought it's pretty interesting interviews with Bjarne Riis, but it's funny because he's doing his interviews in front of like what must be the most beautiful backdrop. It's just like Mediterranean coast, palm trees. You're like, where is Bjarne Riis living? Like, I need more information on this. How can I end up like Bjarne Riis? So Bjarne, if you're listening, we want you on the show. We want you to beam in from your beautiful Mediterranean hideaway.
You know, Bjarne's gotten a bit of a bad rap. If you've been around the sport for a while, he was known as Mr. 60% because his hematocrit was over 60% when he won the Tour de France. If you're not familiar with hematocrits, you're wondering what we're talking about. There's actually a UCI rule. If your hematocrit is above 50, you have to have a medical exemption and demonstrate that you just naturally have an extraordinarily high hematocrit. If your hematocrit is 60, as Spencer noted, you can actually die. Your blood is like jello at that point. There are so many red blood cells, and your ability to transport oxygen is so exceptional. And if you want to look inside of Team CSC in 2004, you got to watch the documentary Overcoming. That's the year that Ivan Basso was attempting to win against an American rider who was winning the Tour de France many times at that point. Also, some really great Bobby Julich content. He has an unfortunate crash while dropping back to the team car to grab a bidon, one of a number of untimely crashes for Bobby at the Tour de France, unfortunately. Great documentary, though. Check it out. I think I still have the DVD somewhere in my house.
Yeah,
might put that on eBay today for anyone who's interested.
I think I watched that with my wife, and she was like, "Doesn't really seem like this movie is a story." I'm like, "It's not. It's about the cuts between the cycling action."
Yeah, it's impressionistic. It's very European. It's got like a Lars von Trier vibe. Yeah,
I think Fred Dreyer described it as like your European cousin's like high school media project or something.
Oh wow!
But he's not a fan of the movie, but. It actually is pretty an interesting peep into that era of cycling. But I was in Berlin as well last week. I'm like now I'm into Team Telekom, like this East German pipeline. I'm fascinated by it. This East German, these kids, they have like footage in this documentary. There's like 5-year-old kids, and they're training like they're in the military and these sports schools. And then that was basically like the pipeline to Deutsche Telekom, and how the team became so dominant in the 90s, and I guess until an American came along and just started crushing them. But it is fascinating, and I can't quite get over that German cycling just kind of like it's like a souffle that just collapsed.
Well,
What happened?
I mean, I think you specified exactly what happened. The Eastern Bloc system, for anyone who's not familiar with it, was a volume game. It was about putting an extremely high volume of young people at a very early age into these sports schools. You would crush them with an inhuman volume of work and intensity, and whoever was left standing at the end are the riders who then would go pro. And I mean, these are people like Ekimov, Ulrich, Jens Voigt. Like, they're all people who came out of these sports schools, and they're total genetic freaks, because when you start with, when that's a large focus of your country at a national level, it's similar to what we see with professional football. And I think this is actually a good segue, Spencer. Last episode we were talking about this idea that World Tour teams might want to look at D1 athletes who have to leave their sports of choice in the United States due to injury as a potential source of recruitment. My new favorite aggregator site, because that seems to be all that exists in the cycling media landscape other than this, the world's fastest growing independent cycling podcast, Cycling Up to Date. I don't know where this aggregator came from. I feel like somebody has a Zapier account, some translation software, and a good GPT put together that's kind of pumping this out. But they had a little career overview of Chloe Dygert this week, and I don't know how I missed this, but Chloe Dygert was apparently a soccer prodigy and left the sport due to injury. And
Wait, I thought it was basketball.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for fact checking me, Spencer. Okay. It's quite early in the morning here in Hope, Maine.
I thought I was losing my mind.
Yeah, you're right. So and then I was just So I'm like, there are a couple of other ex-basketball players out there at a high level. So I'm just like, is she carrying a ball on the road? Does she have aspirations? Is she going to cross over into the WNBA? Like, what's going to happen for her?
I'm looking at her height, 5'9".
Okay.
So she might, that height, like what's Caitlin Clark is like 6'1" or something. So
anyway, we have proof of concept here. That's all I'm saying. Ball sport, and look at this. Yeah.
Actually, we should. I would be interested to have Chloe Dygert on this show, because I know she was basketball prodigy, injured, it's in Indianapolis. It's a cycling school. But I should note, I'm also reading, at the same time I'm watching the documentary about Jan Ulrich, I'm reading Daniel Freebay's biography of him, The Best That Never Was. And one of the key things is his coach in his sports school would like shred those, basically what you're talking about, where they would like do these like high load, basically the Jonathan Vaughters, Mark Wetmore school of training, where you just like basically kill kids, and then the ones that survive the training are the good ones. He would just shred those and like actually did good training, like modern, what would now be considered like modern Pogacar style training. And Ulrich says like that's why he made it. He wouldn't have made it otherwise. Like a lot of these kids just got crushed. I also learned that the West German government, to combat the East Germans kicking their butts in the Olympics, had state-sponsored doping program for young athletes, which I guess probably, I've always wondered like how did like these European sports get so supercharged, like Nordic skiing, cycling? That probably was the origins of it, where you had governments funding and the big bads are always the Eastern European ones, but apparently the Western European countries were also putting state funds towards doping young athletes. So that would explain partly why cycling had such a problem after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and everyone got together and was like, hey, this is how I'm doping. How are you doping? But speaking of doping, speed skating, Andrew, tell us what you've learned about this.
I want to make one more point here on the Eastern Bloc, and just if anybody's interested in like a very deep dive from an athlete's point of view about what it was like inside of these Eastern Bloc training schools that started at a very young age and then just crushed these athletes with volume, intensity, and a large amount of performance enhancing drugs. There is a memoir by an athlete, Galaban Boevsky, I happen to have read. He was an Olympic weightlifter. It's called The White Prisoner, and it is about just that. It's about his experience inside one of these programs. So if you want to read about this miserable lifestyle these athletes led, I recommend giving that a read. And it gets into everything, the PEDs, the volume of training, and just kind of the pressure that they were under. So yeah, Spencer, as you know, this Olympic speed skater, Nils van der Poel, he published an ebook, or actually I guess it was a PDF. It's about 60 pages long, following the 2022 Winter Olympics, at which he won the 5K, 10K, set the world record in both events. And there was a lot of coverage of his training regimen at that time in cycling press, because he largely relied on cycling for his base training. And with great interest, I dove into this PDF in recent weeks as I did some slightly less glamorous travel than yours. I spent some time on Southwest Airlines, multi-stage flights with the family, but I did have the opportunity while we, waited with great terror, wondering whether all four of us would be able to sit close to each other based on the cattle call seating, especially when
I'm already stressed about it.
When you have one of those tight connections on a Southwest flight. You got two kids, you're sprinting, just like sweat's pouring down your back. You got like 20 minutes, the plane's full, and like you roll on there. My kids are young, like they can't really just be stuck in a middle seat. Not a great feeling. Anyhow, between those high intensity intervals,
I bet people refuse to move.
Oh, yeah.
My son is sitting next to you.
Yeah.
Like, your move now. Like, do you want to sit next to a 3-year-old for this flight?
Yeah.
Or do you want to switch me seats?
Completely orthogonal. I've been pitching an idea to a producer I know that it's called the Tank Top Traveler, based on some of my experiences on Southwest. And the concept is that I would just travel around the United States and the world with just a fanny pack, wearing a tank top on the flights, and everything I would need for whatever city I'm visiting would just be in the fanny pack, as I've seen a couple of times on Southwest flights. All respect to people who can pull that off. I know it's kind of trending. Getting back to this ebook, so Nils van der Poel wrote this ebook. It details his training program, which again, geez, this guy, I mean, he makes these Unbound riders look like, lawyers working 80 hours a week, just kind of squeezing in their training. He was, his typical week was 33 hours of cycling weekly, 3 7-hour rides and 2 6-hour rides leading up to the Olympics. He divided his training into 2 phases. One was aerobic, then he had like an interval period, and then he had actual closer to competition. He would go on ice and he would only skate 30-second laps, or sub 30-second laps, because he knew that's what he was going to need to do to break the world record, only by himself, never with other skaters. But there just is a lot of information in this ebook. If you're someone trying to do your very best at that Lifetime Grand Prix event you have on the calendar or whatever, maybe you have a spare 25 to 35 hours a week to train. I think it's worth taking a look here. But the thing that really struck me, and Spencer, as you know, is we're always chopping it up offline about our kind of some of the secret training we're doing, trying to be at the very peak for this Tucson extravaganza. It's going to be bigger than Little Toots. Just the monotony of the training and the simplicity of it really struck me. And it did make me think about, while speed skating is not as dynamic as something like gravel racing, where you could just ride into a pothole at any moment, have your wheel explode, and be extracting gravel from the side of your body for several weeks after the event. I think there's something to be said for keeping your training really simple. And specifically, I guess I didn't say what his intervals were once he got into the interval period, but once he gets into the interval period, his base period, which lasted for an extremely long time, was about 33 hours of riding, all in zone 2. So, Pog, take note. Once he got closer to season, he moved into threshold, and he was doing this is insane. He was doing 8 total hours a week of threshold, and he would do things like 4 by 30 minutes at threshold. His threshold was 390 to 420 watts. Like, can you imagine that? Like, oh, I'm going to go do, you know what? I'm going to do 2 hours of threshold today.
Yeah. There's another, we'll mention him later in the show. There's someone else that does this, that does multi-time 30-minute threshold efforts, which when I was coming up, you know, at the highly developed sports science lab at the University of Kansas cycling department, people would have said, no, you can't do that. You'll be too fatigued. You're going to kill yourself.
Right.
And we should say these intervals are on the bike, because his whole thing is,
all on the bike.
I'm good at skating. I don't need to practice skating. I need to do things that are easy for me to do and get me in the best shape possible. So you also, I don't know if you mentioned this, was like the world's best speed skater and like kind of hated speed skating. He did this all kind of begrudgingly. He's like, it's actually easy to be really good.
Well, he had mandatory military service, and so he came out of the military or ended his service in May 2019. It's just, he has a very refreshing perspective too. And he talks about how when he left the military, said, I was in decent shape. I could squat 125 kilograms, run a 10K in 40 minutes, did a lot of core training. But he talks about how he was very healthy and fit. And then he talks about how, but actually, if you want to be a world-class athlete or just good at what you're doing, you're not doing anything that's particularly healthy. So I think that's something to bear in mind, especially for people out there who are not, I know that primarily World Tour riders are listening to this en masse, probably the entire Peloton. For everyone else,
like on loudspeaker at the Visma camp right now.
I mean, I actually think that they have a blimp flying over the volcano playing this. But it's just interesting to hear this elite athlete's perspective. And he had this period during the peak of his athletic career when he was in military service and had to be fit to do a lot of different things. And he's like, you know what? I had to actually stop being healthy so that I could train for my sport, really, from a preparedness for life point of view, which is something to think about, because you still have to carry groceries, play with your kids. I'm sure. I mean, Spencer, I certainly have known a lot of masters athletes in my day who, you know, that 5-hour training group ride ends on Saturday. They're like, they've got to have their legs up. They can't go rake the leaves or play with the kids, right? Like they have staff to work on that.
Well, even like, I think about this a lot actually, because being really fast on the bike later in life, or when you're like a child raising years, it's actually not that conducive to your lifestyle as a father or someone that wants to even just be healthy.
Right.
You know, because you're not building muscle. You're just kind of like in a hunched over position all the time. But like the bus stop ride in Boulder is at 5 p.m. So there's a lot of like young fathers out there. It's like, dude, that's like the most key hours of the day, like 5 to 7. And you're just like, sorry, honey, I'm gone. The bus stop ride's popping off. But the reason I brought this up and wanted you to talk about it is, if I was more professional, I'd have the quote in front of me, but I'm just going to paraphrase. His whole thing was just like simplicity, you know?
Yeah.
What did he say? He's like, I didn't believe in having equipment I couldn't easily replace, which is something I think about a lot. You know,
I've got to find that.
If you get a nice brand new Ventum bike with the newest SRAM electronic shifting.
I've actually got the quote here. Do you mind if I read it, Spencer?
Yeah, no, you should read it.
All right. So this is on page 26 of the PDF. If you want to learn how to get the PDF on your Kindle, you can email Amazon tech support. It took me a while to figure this out. Now, actually, find your Kindle email address, email yourself the PDF, and type convert in the subject line. That's how you do this. Download the Better Lab, you'll get better sleep. All right, so this is page 26. He says, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. My training program was very simple and therefore very robust. It was cheap and reliable, not fancy nor extraordinary. I tried not to involve things that I could not control. I did not become reliant on equipment that I could not easily access. I did not make plans that I did not understand. I did not follow a culture of buying a bike too expensive to bring about in the rain. Mic drop. You hear that?
Yeah.
I know that this guy was on rim brakes for sure, right?
for sure. That's just a veiled shot at disc brakes, which we should say, while very good at stopping your bike, introduce quite a bit of complexity to your riding, especially if you're like in the rain. I did a couple rainy rides. I also feel like disc brakes were created by, it's like the road industry in like dry California. It's like, well, what if it rains all the time? You're just ripping through those pads like one ride at a time. But I thought that was pretty powerful. A lot of people that are not nearly as good as this guy it would be hard for them to hear that. But
right.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple with your training. Like, there's nothing magic about those training plans that you described. It's just very hard to do.
Yeah. I mean, every aspect of training, and I do think a lot of this is applicable to people like us who, like we could be in the world tour, like if we wanted to go over there and give it a shot, but instead we've decided to focus on other things like having startups and creating content empires and doing this podcast. But I think there's just a ton of advice in here that if you love cycling like we do and you're a practitioner, it's worth thinking about. Like, I'm just going to throw a few more things out here. I needed my coach to ease my burden, not load it. You don't want your coach to make your life more complex or difficult. So I think a good coach will take care of that. He says, when I got sick, my job was instead to rest until I got healthy again. Then I would usually do a test session to see if my body would comply. If it did, I would start pushing again in a careful manner. There was no catching up on missed training sessions. There was instead a new situation to align myself to and make the best out of. The number one priority was not to get sick again. This one's pretty tough, especially if you have young children, travel, or if you're one of the many people out there who unfortunately have been forced to go sit in an office so that someone can say that something to their board of directors about how they've made their team go back to the office to increase efficiency, which is false. But yeah, I think we've all had that situation. You get sick, you freak out, you've like started hitting the gas too quickly, and typically does not go well. And there's so much else in here. If something kept me motivated, I considered it to be good. Sometimes all I needed was a beer or 8 beers.
Is that in there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this guy famously, we didn't mention this. He did all of his training during weekdays, 5 days a week, because he decided that this was so psychologically intense. The only way that he was going to be able to execute this training program is if he lived like a quote unquote normal person, a normie, on the weekends and spent time with friends, family. He was like, yeah, you know what? If my friends want to go on a hike on Saturday, I want to be able to do that. If they want to go out and have a beer, I want to be able to do that. So it's quite different from I'm going to live on a volcano and be locked in the zero dark 30 box unless I'm out training. But
kind of makes you wonder, is that all necessary? Like famously Mads Pedersen and Alexander Kristoff, like just train from their houses, kind of like this guy. They don't go to the camps.
Yeah. He also says, in order to be able to train at a high level, I also needed a good social environment. I tried to only work with people I liked. I was fortunate enough to be able to choose this to some extent. Also, I always aimed to solve problems as soon as they occurred in order not to ache and waste energy on things not worthy of my attention. I was the one held responsible for solving those problems, even though my friends, family, coach, etc. would help me. But since I held myself responsible for the solution to resolve itself, I wasn't able to be upset that other people had not solved my problems for me. Wow. Yeah.
We should just do a whole different podcast where it's a live reading of this guy's book. Poetry session. We should also mention this is 2 years old. Everyone else talked about this 2 years ago. But
you know what? They didn't really go into these aspects of it. They were just like, this guy trained 33 hours a week.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, and they definitely didn't mention he kind of thinks expensive equipment is completely pointless.
Yeah. He was definitely out there. Yeah. He was out there on rigs.
And this is leading into we need to address this. Jack, you've made it impossible for us not to mention you. But Jack Burke, Canadian, who is a listener of this show and will be on this show soon when we figure scheduling out. Canadian, lives in Austria, just like strong rider, been a strong rider for a long time. Got the KOM on a little climb. I don't know if you've heard of it, called the Stelvio a few weeks ago. And if you haven't done the Stelvio before, the record I think was like around a minute or an hour, 13 minutes. And so I made the mistake of looking at that and saying, okay, Rowan Dennis, an hour 13, like what am I going to be, like 120, 125? No, it's like double that, triple that. And that's how long. It's a long climb, like 2 hour plus climb. Jack does it, I think, in like 111, like absolutely. It's been flagged, so you can't actually see his exact time, but crushes it. And it's like snowing at the top when he does it. Not content with that. And he's not on a team this year. This man he was like in the 3rd division on the continental team last year. Now he's not on a team. He does the Motorola, which is close to the Stelvio, but it's like just like another famous Giro d'Italia climb. 7 miles long. Do you want to guess the average grading, Andrew?
8%?
A little 12% average grade. So getting 4,200 feet of elevation gain in 7 miles. That's ridiculous.
Not bad.
This is, I think, last week. So it's snowing at the top. Gets the KOM on that. Let's just read some of the names that he beat. Oh, 2nd place, Vincenzo Nibali, Jan Hurt, Giulio Ciccone, Damiano Caruso, Pavel Sivakov, Emmanuel Buchmann. He's like crushing. Like he is 3 minutes faster than Sivakov. So doing some pretty good times on this. VAM, like his VAM on the Motorola. And some of these climbs are higher than you think. Like the Stelvio tops out at around 10,000 feet. So you're dealing with altitude at the top. On the Motorola, his average power was 435 watts, around like just below 1,800 VAM. I believe he weighs around 66 kilos, Jack. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's like 6.6 watts per kilo for around 45 minutes. On the Stelvio, as I said, it's higher altitude. So power is a little bit lower. I think it was like 401 watts for 71 minutes. So let's just say 41. Let's say you weighed 65. That's like 6.2 watts per kilo for over an hour. Like if this guy was on a team, like let's just say pick a mid-tier team. If he was on EF, he might be their best climber. Well, not good. They have Richard Carapaz. If he was on Ineos, he might be their best climber. Like it's unbelievable what he's doing. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this from just an amateur guy, not on a team. Like I'm going to go out and get some, you always see these people. It's like that Harvard rower guy who's the gravel national champion. It's like, you always see like sub World Tour guys putting out big watts, but there's usually caveat like, 450 watts for an hour, but he weighs 95 kilos. Like Jack actually has the watts per kilo of, not a Pogacar, but a lot, a lot of the guys in the pack behind Pogacar, like he's certainly putting out watts per kilo at that level. So I just had to mention this because I think a lot about it. Like what is happening here? I mean, I know he's not European. And he wrote a book called How to Be a Pro Cyclist. I'm currently reading it. I will talk about it more when I finish it. But one of the things he talks about is that he's not, like Matteo Jorgensen was his teammate. He said Matteo, I think he describes him as like not talented, but Matteo was very good at going into teams and like learning the language in a year. So, like if like Matteo just lives in Nice and just speaks French in his day to day, like it's, he has soft skills like that. And Jack kind of talks about how he just like didn't learn German, even though he lived in Austria, just like didn't have the linguistic abilities or maybe the soft skills to integrate quite as well. So, there's maybe some hesitancy there, but basically this might just be anti-Canadian discrimination. People look at this guy like he's going to be out there chopping trees down, getting maple syrup. He's going to be draining these trees for maple syrup. He's not going to be focused on his racing. I don't know what the deal is, but if like I'm looking at teams with space, like if you're,
I'm just thinking Israel Premier Tech because they have that Canadian connection. They've got the.
I know that would be the obvious one. They're full.
Come on, it's not too late to flick somebody.
But like Maxime Van Hills just left Lotto's. Yeah, exactly. Johan always talks about that. How you can just pay people to like go home.
Yeah, you
Just pay them their
there's somebody
salary
you
to
can
sit at
get
home.
rid of. Yeah. Well, I mean, Spencer, before like let's get into this. Let's talk about where he potentially can go. Let's also talk though, before we do that, Jack has those World Tour watts. He's 29. Let's say he walks into your team at the World Tour level without that World Tour Peloton experience of moving around, right? I mean, he has raced on a lot of continental teams, Leopard Pro Cycling, Jelly Belly, Avelo, H&R Black Pro Cycling, but he hasn't been in a World Tour Peloton moving around, which we all know is quite different. So how's he going to plug into a team, and what do you see him doing? Is he, is this like do you see him being like a Sepp Kuss type, towing people around in the mountains? Like, what do you see him doing? What's his function within the team?
You bring up a good point, because this, like, the skills of being in the Peloton, a World Tour Peloton, clearly going to be, that's what's scaring a lot of people off. I would assume he's 29.
Yeah.
But that's about the age that Mike Woods was when he came over.
Yeah, I'm not saying he can't do it. I want to see Jack go to the World Tour for sure. But if I'm a World Tour team owner and I'm making some budget decisions, that's got to be the X factor. And Vontz actually talked about this a lot, because he would go out, he would find people with big engines, Craig Lewis, Tom Danielson. I mean, I did a story. I'm going to throw one over the mountain right now. I did a story, I think in 2005 or 2006, working with Vontz and Garmin Chipotle. I don't remember what the team was then. It was about how Craig Lewis was going to be the next Lance. And
oh no,
yeah,
you screwed him.
Yeah, but I mean,
the moment those words are uttered,
right? But Craig Lewis, he did have that world-class engine, and what Vontz told me at the time, and it's definitely axiomatic. It's like, you can have the watts, but like, can you be there? Can you get to the front of the race and be there at that moment to do what you need to do? So it's definitely about the positioning battle and just saving energy, moving around in the Peloton for the moments when it's like, okay, go do 7 watts per kilo up this mountain for an hour, Jack.
Well, we should say, if he was doing 7 watts per kilo up a mountain for an hour, he'd be winning the tour. So that would be a little above and beyond it. Probably the hardest part for him is like, get to the bottom of the climb doing as few watts as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I mean, these are all good points. Like the lack of experience. Sometimes though, I wonder if like people like Vontz roll that out a little too easily, because they say that, and then there's people I know of that were in the World Tour last year that like don't care and aren't really training and are just taking up space on a team. Like, wouldn't you just rather have someone that does care and is a world-class rider? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like, look at Total Energy's roster. They have 26 riders. They don't have, I guarantee you, they don't have very many people with just the raw engine of Burke. So just throw Burke on that team, go to the tour and say, get in some breaks, because if you don't do that, it does. If you fail, it doesn't matter, because we weren't going to be good anyway. Like they did win a stage of the tour, we should say, last year with. Do we remember that man's name? Hold on a second. I can't believe I've already forgotten this. It was Tour de France, Anthony Turgis, who's very good.
Yeah.
But just like, try to replicate the Turgis experience. Like he got, I believe that was in a breakaway. Yeah, he won that stage out of a breakaway.
Right.
Like, I don't know. What do they have to lose? There's so many teams without the guys of that level. Like Uno X obviously doesn't work, but like, Lotto's got a decent pipeline, but they just kind of got left high and dry by Van Hills, who's piecing out, going somewhere for 3 times the money. Like, I don't know, just bring in Burke and say, go out there and do stuff, in the words of Bill Simmons. Like, get in some breaks, see what you can do, because that's essentially what EF did with Woods. Like, guys like that, it's probably harder for them actually to do the Sepp Kuss job, because they don't have, Sepp Kuss is very, he's like world class at like reading the situation and knowing how to help somebody. That can be a skill in itself. Probably would be harder to learn, honestly, than just trying to get in breakaways and win mountain stages.
Well, while we're talking about it, I mean, part of the problem is it's November 22nd. It's kind of tough at this point to get that World Tour contract. I mean, if you want to make it as hard as possible, you've done it. I'm not sure why this didn't happen. Had this happen in, I don't know, May, June, that's like when contract stuff's really shaking and moving. And just as we're talking through this, like Votter's name is coming up so frequently. This is exactly the kind of narrative that Matt Bowden and Jonathan Votter specialize at turning into large scale media coverage for multiple years in a row. So like this is like a perfect EF narrative.
The only thing about EF is he had, what do they call it, an AAF, an adverse analytical finding.
Yeah, but I mean, EF had like, I think they had a number of adverse analytical findings. Yeah, I think they had the most positive doping tests of anyone. And like, let's give this guy a break. He was cleared, right? So, Water
argument was
really went after him, but this was when in 2013 when he was a junior. I mean, I guess you could say. Yeah, and it was like there are some extenuating circumstances. I mean, there always are, but he was cleared of this, right?
Yeah, he was cleared. The argument was if you're trying to go pro in North America, there's all these Canadian races that are kind of like, they're big, they're prestigious, but they're kind of like small time. So you're in like, he was at like a golf course, and that's early in the morning. It's like 7 a.m, and you have to just like fill your bottles up from the tap, and he didn't fill his bottles up at the hotel. So he just like went into the golf club, filled up his bottles. But I grew up in a place like this where you drink well water, but what is the well underneath? It's underneath land that is being fertilized. And this is just like concerning for people's health outside of cycling. But the theory was he drank the fertilizer, which had the chemical in it that he tested positive for.
Yeah. Also near mining. Yeah. So this is, anyhow, but if you think about that moment in time, 2013, doping, a super, it's always a hot topic, but particularly at that moment in time. And so here we are, 2024, November 22nd, Mortarolo KOM.
It's insane.
Ride. Yeah.
Like over a minute faster than Nibali, who's pretty good. Not a bad rider.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's not doing this, and you can caveat it to death. Like, he's not doing it in a race. He's like saving his best effort for that. But like, setting all that aside, amazing engine. I'd have to imagine he would take the minimum, right? Like I think what gets tough is you're this late. If you're like, let's say Larry Warbus, and you haven't found a team, you're probably not going to sign for the minimum. And then it can be really tough because a team is like, we don't have a ton of budget left. Do we really want to pay someone this much money? Like, let's just wait, because the longer we wait, the cheaper we can sign riders for. I think Swain touched on it. It's EF's tactic is always like ghost people until January and then lowball them. My pushback on that is that's how you lose good riders, because anyone that has a better offer is going to leave. That's what happened with Magnus Cort. He didn't hear back from the team, and he said, I guess I got to go. And he signed with Uno X, and I'm sure EF would have liked to have Magnus Cort this year. So I don't fully understand that strategy, but you can get some riders for very cheap doing that. The problem is they're not often the best riders. I think that's it. I mean, I do have a bigger question about like Maxime. You called this, by the way, 2-3 weeks ago. I was like, no, there's all these new UCI rules. You can't just like leave a team anymore without the team's approval.
Yeah.
Maxime Van Hills is leaving Lotto for, we don't know, Ineos potentially, but they're full. So I have questions about that. Like maybe Red Bull, maybe UAE. That would be hilarious if they just kept signing the world's best young riders. But it kind of makes me concerned that like, is the flow of traffic in cycling, it's like, okay, you're in a small team, you're good. You get sucked up to one of these 3 big rich teams. And people say, it's always like, oh, this is like football, like also known as soccer. But it's actually not like that, because teams can survive in soccer by selling off young, good riders to bigger teams. But in cycling, they just get taken. Like there's no structure for them to actually really monetize that. I'm just flagging it as something I'm like, ooh, this could get actually kind of weird if every good rider in the world ends up on one of Visma, Red Bull, or UAE. Like
Right.
that, we could be entering some strange times.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll, as always, we'll see what happens. And I'm, that's just this whole Red Bull situation. I am really curious, like, where are we going to land with this thing? I don't think the race is run yet. I think we got a few more moves left.
I think Remco 2026. I mean, the fact that he said
2026,
I'm with Soudal through 2020 for 2025. That's kind of weird to say because he has a contract with them through 2026.
Well, one other topic I wanted to get into, Spencer. I know we both have to run. I have to go load metal studded tires into the back of the car. It's time to put them on here in Hope, Maine. Once this rain stops, we're going to be straight into ice season. Victor Campenaerts on the Geraint Thomas podcast. Did you listen to this episode?
No.
All right. First thing I wanted to say is now that Campenaerts is porting over to Visma, are we going to see him in a helmet that fits? That's my first question. Second thing I wanted to say, Campenaerts did an extremely detailed deep dive on precisely what he did to win his stage at the 2024 Tour de France. He was in the breakaway with Kwiatkowski and another rider whose name is escaping me, younger rider, but he basically walked through, this is exactly what I did to psychologically manipulate these people into a situation where I could win the race. And he went into such precise detail, it actually made me think he no longer intends to do any winning. Because I think he's given away. I mean, even if you're a low-level racer, we've all done these things. They're the classic, hey, they're about to catch us. He used that one. That's. I think that's one of the best things you can do if you have people who are not cooperating or they have a teammate that's bridging or whatever. Just yell that at them. Don't call them names or tell them to F off or whatever. Just tell them you're going to get caught and you think that you can make it.
I see him. I see him back there. Yeah. Oh, that was one of my favorites.
I've done that. I did that to win a mountain bike race one time. I was like, I can hear him. And then, you keep going. I can hear him. And then you get the person to blow up and then you counterattack them and win the race. Anyway, he used that one and just a lot of puffery to pump up Kwiatkowski's ego. How he I know you're the superior sprinter. Please, just, don't
draw me. Don't draw me. I like fully, and people do the yelling. I would always be like, oh man, you guys are so strong. Like I'm barely hanging on. Like, oh, just keep going. You're gonna make it. I'm probably gonna get dropped. I'm just barely hanging on here. And then he went the sprint
completely. And then he talked about how I'm sorry, the name of that other rider is escaping me. Whose name I should know. Like that.
His name is Matteo Vircher.
Yeah. Total stud. Like who's got that kid next year? He's incredible.
Total Energies. Oddly.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Jeez. This also was a 33 rider breakaway. That's a big breakaway. Holy smokes.
Yeah. So his other big technique was telling Matteo loudly in French, because he knew Kwiatkowski understands French, but not highly fluent. But he's like, use rudimentary French, extremely loud, to tell him what a good sprinter Kwiatkowski was. It's just like anything he could do just to pump up Kwiatkowski and make him think like, I've got this in the bag. And then of course, that's not how things went down, as is often the case in bike racing. So extremely smart in the moment. I don't know that I'd be saying all of that in precise detail on Geraint Thomas's podcast just because someone asked me the question.
I think he said after stage 7 of the tour that that's the last time trial he's going to ever try it.
Yeah.
Not true, because I'm looking at it. He definitely tried stage 21 of the Vuelta, but he definitely, everything he was saying this year makes it seem like he's done winning and he's going to Visma just to work, not to like chill out, but to work for the team. But
yeah, I'm really curious to see how this is going to pan out, because as we've talked about before, the guy's got to have one of them, along with Taco van der Hoorn, one of the lowest CDAs in professional cycling. Like I think it's Remco level. This guy just has zero draft. So if your plan is I'm going to put Camp and Airts on the front for 4 hours,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? You want some guy that's 6'2" with really broad shoulders that's creating a great draft for your team, not somebody that, is like a bullet. But what do I know?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, I don't fully understand that. And, it's double edged. Like, the bigger the rider, the more draft they provide, but it also means the stronger they are because they're fighting drag. Like someone like Campenart's, his numbers, if you looked at them, not that they would be pedestrian, but they probably would not pop off the page, especially when you look like his hour record power and stuff like that, just because he's such a low CDA. He doesn't have to produce a lot of power to hold a high speed versus someone like Niels Pollitt, who can get on the front for Pogacar and just like rip because the guy is so big and he puts out such massive watts. He can lead out or he can set pace on climbs. Like, yeah, I don't fully understand what role Victor's going to play at Visma, but I wonder if they just thought, like, if you have a chance to sign someone of that quality, do you just do it and figure it out later?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at this. Shame on me. I actually want to look at his height relative to the people who he potentially would be dragging around. I get the feeling he's a couple of inches shorter than Jonas, Sepp. I mean, predominantly his role is going to be on flat and rolling stages to maintain an extremely high pace and sit on the front. In the mountains, he can climb, but he's not a climbing domestique, right? So he's going to be shelled by the time the action really starts. So it'll be about getting those riders into position at Grand Tours, leading into climbs, keeping them safe on the flats. And again, on the flats, I mean, Visma has the best performance engineers, as they're now called, in the world. So I think they know what they're doing. Equally, where does he go in the train? Who sits on his wheels? And like, think about Matteo, for example. He's like 6'3", right?
Yeah, he's really tall. Well, now that I look about it, he's around the same height as Jonas.
Okay.
And so that problem Visma does have is because they're a Dutch team with really tall riders. They sometimes have a problem having someone the same height as Jonas, which is important because as we saw on stage 9, when he has to take a bike, he needs someone. Remember like the debacle?
Yes.
I think it was 2022 or whatever. Yeah, where they couldn't find the right size bike. And this year they did have a guy that was his height. They just want like, hey, Victor, you sit on Jonas's wheel.
Interesting. Yeah. You put him back on rim brakes.
But I guess the problem with that is imagine how weird this setup is going to be. You're like, why
right.
They're canted it
right
at an extreme angle. Also, just before, I know you have to go, I'm looking at their weights. Campenart's 68 kilos. Jonas, 58 kilos. That's refreshed from this year. He used to race at like 63 kilos. So he was significantly lighter this year. Something Greg LeMond mentioned when I heard him speak last week is he said he raced at 68 kilos and his FTP was around 403 watts, which is like, that's around 6 watts per kilo. Pedestrian, right? Like you're going to get dropped. But he said the difference is if he was racing now, he'd be racing at 58 kilos. He would essentially be Jonas Vingegaard's size, and that's 7 watts per kilo. So I thought that was like an interesting thing. He's like, we were just big, like we were big, normal sized humans. You cannot be a normal sized human and be a good climber in today's cycling.
Did he talk about why that was the case and why they didn't just shed more weight?
He didn't go into it. It was kind of implied that they probably didn't have the data to know that it was worth it. And it's also one of those things is if other people aren't doing it, you don't do it because it's so miserable.
Yeah. Okay.
And they were like Pogacar. They were just like good all the time, right? Because Le Mans was doing classics. It wasn't just this focus on the tour. So it's like Le Mans and Pogacar are racing around their natural weights, which is why they can do that. I think when, probably when Lance Armstrong started to come along and just focus on the tour, it didn't happen in Lance's era, but after Lance's era, like the Sky era, it like really no one thought like, hey, let's strip every possible pound off your body. And then you would never do that unless other people were doing it because it's so miserable.
Well, and going back to the Nils van der Poel speed skating ebook, one of the things that he did for, a big chunk of his training year, he would just carry extra weight. And part of the reason he did that was You can train at a higher intensity if you're not starving yourself, and you're way, way less likely to get sick. I don't think people think about this, but when these guys are rolling around with like 2 or 3% body fat, if anybody out there, if you've ever cut your body fat to sub 10%, you're way more likely to get sick. You just are.
Yeah. Like this, when I think of when I was like really skinny, like not skinny for a cyclist, but skinny for me, I was always sick, and I definitely trained at lower intensity. Even then, I'm going to go jump on the Peloton right now and probably ride at a higher intensity than I did when I was like a fast racer, if that makes sense. Because your body's just so much more robust.
Yeah. I'm going to throw out one more thing here. So Patrick Lantern Rouge had a training podcast last week. I don't remember which high performance expert he had on, but the guy was talking about how, in his view, he does think that amateur cyclists from time to time should train in a fasted state and that it's okay. And anyone who listened to that, I wanted to caveat that, like, I'm not a performance engineer and I'm not training a world tour team. I would just say that if you're an amateur cyclist and you have limited time to train, you want to get the most out of every training session. And I think by fueling your training with high carbohydrate, even if it's a recovery ride, and there actually were some great recommendations on that podcast about exactly how much carb you might want to consume based on the effort. I don't think you should ever train in a fasted state, because I think you're going to get more out of fueling your training and training at a higher intensity, and the caloric burn that you will get as a consequence of that, and the training benefit you will get, versus I'm going to starve myself today and I'm going to go out and, do a 1-2 hour fasted ride. If you're training 6 or 7 hours per week, I don't think that's efficient. I don't think that's a smart thing to do. I've just heard people talking subsequent to listening to that podcast about doing that, because if you look at meta-analyses, fasted training is a waste of time. You're not training your body to preferentially burn fat. Nothing magic's happening. You're just not going to be able to train at the intensity you typically train at because you're glycogen depleted.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I guess I would recommend doing like a fasted run. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like
fasted run because you don't want to do a Taylor nib, right?
Oh my God. We're not talking about that. I would say the professionalism and like poise in which she delivered the request to the camera is pretty impressive.
That's called being a professional.
That is.
Honestly, it's like one of the most poised things I've ever seen a professional athlete do.
Yeah. Yes. And what was the prize purse for that? Was it $200,000 US? Or was that, it was like some massive amount of money. Like, I need to learn more about T100.
Yeah.
This series. Maybe that's where Camp and Art is going in a few years. But I will let you go, Andrew, and we will we might not be back next week because it's Thanksgiving, but we'll be back the week after that.